Hey, this is Dead by Daylight. It's an asymmetrical multiplayer horror game, but it isn't scary. Let's take a little journey to figure out why, and maybe I'll even give some ideas on how to spice it up a bit. Dead by Daylight has had a weird life. The game was originally released in June of 2016 to generally positive reception. It was a brand new take on the asymmetrical multiplayer genre, being preceded by Left 4 Dead 2's multiplayer and Primal Carnage, although it absolutely blew Primal Carnage out of the water with not only its gameplay, but also its cultural impact. To that point, I'd argue Dead by Daylight is the game that brought forth the idea of asymmetrical multiplayer as a defined genre in the first place. The gameplay consists of one player acting as the killer and 4 players acting as survivors. Survivors can take 2 hits from the killer before going down, at which point the killer can pick them up and put them on a hook. Survivors have 3 hook states, and when they eventually run out of hook states, well, I'm sure you can guess. But the survivors aren't just screwed the moment the killer finds them. There are multiple things around the map that can help them to delay or even escape the killer. Survivors can pull down pallets to block their path. Their smaller and more nimble stature allows them to vault through windows faster than the killer and also allows them to vault over pallets after they've dropped them. The objective on the survivor side is to escape the trial, the in-universe explanation for the match taking place. Survivors do this by repairing all 5 generators and then opening the exit gate. Now that we know how the game is played, let's talk about why it's so weird. So, it's 2016, and a little company from Montreal just released their first big title, and it's nothing like anybody has ever seen, to both its benefit and detriment. Being hot off the presses and basically pioneering a whole genre isn't the easiest situation to navigate. You have to be a really sharp designer to get out of development without a multitude of problems. And unfortunately for Behavior, they did not quite have everything under control. It turns out a lot of the solutions and mechanics they brought into the game were very exploitable and basically turned the gameplay loop on its head. Survivors became bullies who ruthlessly taunted the killer, dropping pallets on their heads and making fun of them. In contrast, killers became not only a punching bag, but also genuinely the most stressed players I have ever seen in any game at this point in my life. To be fair to the developers, I think in the long run, the design choices here contributed heavily to the game's staying power. Having a gameplay loop more akin to freeze tag than hide and seek lends itself much better to replayability, as it turns out. But in all the fray, the game lost something. The fear. A good killer is respected, maybe even loved, but they're rarely, if ever, feared. Those who seek to scare their opponents are regarded as bringing the horror back to Dead by Daylight rather than simply playing in concert with the systems of the game. Even though many parts of the game attempt to instill fear, it seems to fail every single time. Why? To understand that, first we need to understand how exactly we get scared. We all... I'm sorry, I can't... Did that say Merry Christmas? Are you fucking kidding me? Who did that? Tim? Okay, bring Tim in here. No, bring him the fuck in here right now. All right, so Tim, tell me, do you think that is acceptable in October to have it say Merry Christmas?
I was celebrating early.
Oh, you were celebrating early. Yeah, you're fired.
What?
I'm burning your house down. Get out.
No, I can fix this.
Get the fuck out, Tim. Sorry about that. Let's get back on track. We all understand what fear is in the abstract. That feeling of your chest tightening up, your breaths getting shorter, a feeling of anticipation. You're standing on a knife's edge, but you don't know when you're going to drop. What we don't all understand is how exactly those feelings of fear come about. There's 3 main aspects to good horror, in my opinion. I'll list them in order. Number 1, immersion. A good scare can only come from the point where in some amount you believe you're in real danger, even if it's just a momentary trick taking advantage of your survival instincts. Number 2, information. It's hard to scare someone who knows what's coming, and in contrast, it can be hard to calm someone who doesn't. And number 3, power. Man, that one hurt my throat a bit. Jesus. Power it's like a rope drawn in to tame a horse, but you're leading it out to make the horse more wild. Players need to have enough agency to be able to reasonably invest themselves in a character. If you can't change someone's fate in a horror game, you probably won't really care about them at all. All right, so before we continue further, I need to touch on something. A discussion on a topic like this is inherently somewhat fluid. There's a lot of overlap, which is why I had to lay out things beforehand. I can't really discuss one aspect without merging into the others a bit, so please just try and keep these 3 tenets in mind throughout the video and see how they apply. With the original intention of Dead by Daylight in mind as a horror party game, how many of these marks does it hit? Well, even though I just laid out everything like it's quite simple, it isn't. Look, this research paper is a definition. This is longer than 2 of my scripts combined. Evidently, we need to take aim at a very specific slice of things, or we will be here for a very long time. What I'd like to speak of in relation to this in particular is the feeling of spatial presence, as it's described in this paper. Spatial presence is a feeling of association to a place, or in our case, a thing that exists elsewhere. If you've ever gotten really into a game, you can probably remember a moment where the world started to feel real, where you felt like you were in Skyrim, climbing a mountain to meet the Greybeards, or a moment where you swerved out of the way in real life to give yourself that little bit of extra distance, only to remember that you aren't in the game. That is spatial presence. As far as I'm aware, I'm actually not sure because this paper is really long and they use a lot of big words that I find very confusing. Academic speak is truly a different language. Let's pull the rope back in a bit. In our admittedly very specific context, there are a few things that we can pull from this paper to inform our choices. Let me read you a passage. Both types of attention may be involved in the development of a spatial presence, but their relative contributions may vary. Specifically, we presume that intended and focused processes of attention are negatively related to the immersiveness of a mediated representation. I don't know where that came from. Sorry. Jeez, what the fuck? What does that mean for us? Basically, any friction between you and the world has the possibility of breaking your immersion. Bugs and glitches, obviously, but also bad controls, things that are difficult to parse, tonal inconsistencies, and just having too much information coming at you at once. Every one of these things can completely take you out of it. In relation to horror, some of these things are easy. One of the things a good horror movie can do is not tell you everything. It leaves you to stew in your own mind and mold a villain from your worst fears and anxieties. Other aspects, however, are not so forgiving to the horror genre, and even less so to the horror game genre, notably parsing. A game has to tread a fine line between scary and inequitable. You need enough information to be invested and want to play, but if you get too much information, nothing's going to scare you at all. It's a very fine line because to one direction, your game just isn't scary, and to the other direction, we have an experience that I'm sure some people watching this are going to be familiar with. You boot up a fighting game or League of Legends or something that has a pretty steep learning curve, and you just get frustrated by everything because the game doesn't tell you anything, and you just quit. That's not what we want for a good horror game. You shouldn't have to tell people, well, once you figure it out, it's great. We just want them to be able to play and enjoy themselves. The specifics of how much information the game offers you can vary. In Five Nights at Freddy's, for example, the game seems to offer you quite a lot of information. And in fairness, it does. You have a whole camera network at your disposal. You can track the animatronics' every move, and you know if and when they're coming for you. But there's always information the game doesn't tell you. The game, for example, doesn't teach you the animatronics' behavior. The game doesn't tell you that you don't need to look at Foxy to stop him from advancing. You only need to look at the cameras. Or that Freddy never moves backwards. Or that the animatronics wait for you to flip your camera down before scaring you. The game doesn't tell you these things because if it did, things would be a lot less scary. It becomes a formula to act upon rather than a set of challenges to overcome. As you may have guessed, Dead by Daylight is plagued by this problem. Routines feel safe. Everything is expected, nothing surprises you, and you don't have to react to anything. Going back to the Five Nights at Freddy's example, the game stops being scary the moment you start to push its limits. As you become more familiar with things, the mood changes from impending doom to 9 to 5, which, while thematically fitting, isn't particularly scary. There's nobody on this planet who has even attempted 2020 and still finds the animatronics any bit scary. In pursuit of this, a good horror game will seek to take away the tools tools that make you feel in control of the situation, push you out of your safe spaces, and force you into awkward situations. It not only forces you out of your routine, good horror will do everything in its power to prevent you from forming a new routine. Dead by Daylight's design is almost completely antithetical to this mindset. For starters, while to a new player there might seem to be inherent risk to working on a generator, there really isn't that much. From the survivor perspective, you can hear anytime the killer is getting close, you barely have to devote any mental faculty to the actual fixing of generators, and you're usually within running distance of a pallet, meaning building a flowchart of what to do in any situation is laughably easy. That's not even the worst of it though. Sure, the game may give you a rough information on the killer's proximity to you constantly, and also allow you to focus on your surroundings, meaning you almost never are put into a situation where you could even be surprised, let alone actually scared. But there's something much worse than this. I have a question for you, viewer. If a slasher movie villain isolates you, is that a good thing or a bad thing? Yup, that's right. It's a good thing. Wait, what? Yeah, about that. Because Dead by Daylight is at its core a battle of resources, the survivors are always looking to trade their chase time, pallets, and hook states for generators and generator progress. A consequence of this system is that getting isolated as a survivor is not only a good thing, it's optimal, because that means 3 other players doing generators. That's right, even getting caught isn't scary, because why should getting caught by the maniacal serial killer be any more than an inconvenience? Remember those 2 health states I talked about from before? As I'm sure you've guessed at this point, that too helps to take the edge off just a little bit more. First of all, obviously having the knowledge that you can take 1 hit before the killer gets you doesn't exactly help with instilling a sense of impending doom into players. But it's not the worst thing on its own. Forcing players into a dying state where they're on their last legs, crawling away desperately, trying to escape can still help to bring a slow, creeping feeling of dread. Although a mechanic like this will inherently have a low shelf life. So it's a shame that it comes after you get hit twice. You want to know what happens when you get hit the first time? After that whole long chase, your fuse is finally whittled down and you're at the end of your rope. Psych! You got hit? Here's a speed boost. Keep on going, buddy. You're only halfway done. Listen, at the very least, being injured has to make you move slower, right? Nope. Oh, and guess what? There's even a perk that makes you faster while you're injured, because why not? Hell, how about we give them a perk that lets them take a 3rd hit? Or how about a perk that lets you stab the killer? Or what about a perk that lets you just disable hooks? That sounds like a great idea! These are all real perks in the game. All 3 of them. I don't know why either. The perks and add-ons in this game are beyond fucked. There's an add-on for the toolbox that lets you complete a skill check to add 15% progress to a generator, just because. There's an add-on for the medkit that can give you back a health state after a delay, and another one that gives you endurance, a status effect that lets you tank an extra hit and go into the deep wound state instead of being downed. And there's flashlights, which might seem useless until you find out that you can use them to blind the killer, which also forces them to drop any survivor they were carrying, returning that survivor to the injured state and allowing them to run away. Not only that, but you can upgrade the blind speed, radius, and battery. And all of these are post-nerfs. Here's what they used to do. Oh, and back to the perks. Well, first of all, this system is entirely malconceived in the first place. Why are we giving the survivors even more power? Not only is this a terrible idea from a horror perspective, it also just isn't smart from a gameplay perspective. Killers have perks because they're in a 1v4 situation, meaning they need that extra boost to help them. It also brings in some diversity. Different builds feel different to play. You can customize your killer to you. The killer, appropriately for being 1v4, gets 4 perk slots, allowing for interesting and diverse build crafting that supports multiple playstyles. So if the killer has 4 perks, how many perks do you think the survivors get? That's right, they get 4 each, totaling to 16. Do you see the problem here? Giving the survivors this many perks is just silly. I mean, we're giving them too much power. It wouldn't be as bad if the perks weren't generally on par or above the power of killer perks. Yes, I believe that. Seriously, it's that bad. Listen, let's take an example, all right? Killer's strongest perk generally, historically, has been NOED. No one escapes death. All right, this perk, when all generators are completed, you get a totem that lights up. That's how it works now. There didn't used to be a totem. Doesn't really matter for our purposes, okay? You get a totem that lights up and you can one hit down every survivor. Wow, super strong. It is. People swung games with no end all the time. You know what people swung games with more? Dead Hard. Because all Dead Hard was fucking stupid. You know what else they swung games with? Fucking this bullshit, this stupid ass build that I had to deal with for 3 years. I swear to fucking God, I'm gonna lose my shit. I'm gonna come to behaviors officers. I'm gonna take a shit in the goddamn lobby. I'm fucking done with this shit. This is a reason I stopped playing this game. I had to play this game again to record fucking footage for this video. I fucking hated that shit. That shit was ass, all right? This game is dog shit. I'm gonna go fucking lose my shit. I'm gonna go become a crackhead on the streets. Every time someone comes up to me, I'm gonna grab them, I'm gonna shake them, I'm gonna go, hey, don't play Dead by Daylight. Don't do it. Don't do it. As you might be able to tell, I do not like the perk system. I could keep going for a very long time, but I don't want to do that, so we're not going to do that. We're gonna move ahead. Just know that the perk system was really bad. It irreparably damaged the game from a horror perspective, and it was just, the balance was so shit for so long. Like, really, really bad. All right, is that everything? Looks like other than some edge cases, that's all the stuff that stops the game from being scary. No, hold on a second. Something's off. Wait a damn minute! They fucked up the camera? How? Why? Just a question, if I may. Why is the killer looking over their shoulder more often than the survivors? Seriously, like, it's just comical at this point. Why do the survivors even have better cameras? The design here is so, like, fundamentally horrible. How is there ever supposed to be a feeling of lacking information, balancing quick checks over your shoulder, and focusing on the task at hand? Not only is progressing generators in the first place such a brain-dead activity, you barely have to pay mind to it, you can also hear the killer coming, you can easily check the entirety of your surroundings, and something I didn't mention before, there is also a red light that flares out in front of the killer like they're a fucking reversing pickup truck. So the survivors can see you before you even see them. Why? This game is supposed to be a love letter to horror, and yet behavior seems obsessed with treating the player base like toddlers who need to be coddled at every single turn. This is absurd. All right, listen, reeling back in the persona for a sec. Some things I understand not being able to make it into the game for the sake of longevity and competitive viability, but a lot of these things are changes that make genuinely no sense. While the stain, for example, has created red stain manipulation, a tactic in which you intentionally face your stain in a particular direction to fake out your opponent, it's still a pretty horrible idea. The only purpose of something like this would be to prevent survivors getting surprised. You know, in the horror game. And while red stain manipulation is somewhat interesting, it gives the survivors a better mix-up game than the killers. It also can't be ignored that the technique was developed to circumvent the mechanic entirely. A common complaint from players has been how brain dead it feels to do generators, meaning not only is the current implementation bad, players also have actively asked for the system to be changed. That's fine though, clearly they just don't know what they really want. Oh, and speaking of what players really want, how about just a little callback as a treat from me? Cosmetics! Yes, just like every other big game these days, we need to Fortniteify our monetization, offer players a bunch of lurid cosmetics to assault their eyes, trick their dopamine receptors, and empty their wallets. I already have a whole video that, while in hindsight could have been elaborated on a bit more, covers my grievances with microtransactions and this type of monetization scheme. But what I haven't yet gone in depth about is when cosmetics are actively hurtful to a game's world. Do you want to see notorious serial killer John Wayne Gacy become a funny mascot horror character? Or do you want to play as Levi Ackerman from Attack on Titan? Or maybe Dwight was looking a little low armor to you, so you went ahead and equipped his PUBG cosplay. As you may have guessed, when the aesthetic is supposed to be a brutal slasher film, the killer looking like, that kind of takes away from the effect. It's a constant reminder that you are playing a game. For other genres, this type of thing is either inconsequential or a minor inconvenience, but when half the entire concept of your game is built around immersion, intrusive cosmetics become a bit more of a problem. I do understand that the developers need to support themselves, and the game and servers cost money to upkeep, and in fairness, a lot of these cosmetics are passable at the least. They might make you do a double take, sure, but they aren't too hard to suspend your disbelief with. But when the cosmetics miss, they really miss. And players usually end up flocking to those very cosmetics because they're the most unique and interesting. They break the mold. There's a great, I think, set of videos on this, actually, from the TF2 community. I don't know exactly who it is, but I'll hopefully put it up on screen. You should go watch those if you have time, but finish this first, please. I like money. That's the only reason. That's literally the only reason. I just like money. I'm a bad person. I'm a bad human. I want your money. Give me your money. Give it to me now. Give it to me now. I'm coming to get I'm gonna steal. The cosmetic problem also contributes to this issue that the game has aesthetically as a whole. Over time, the game's visuals have been watered down for the sake of clarity, just like Rainbow Six Siege, and it's removed some of the stylistic edge the game once had. It also did something a little strange. There's no better way to describe it, goofy undertone that is present honestly pretty often. Part of this is the player base getting up to depravity in an attempt to entertain themselves with a toy they won't admit stopped being fun to play with 3 years ago. But the other part is the level to which the game's visual identity has been compromised. It's hard to take the game seriously when it doesn't seem to afford itself the same courtesy. There are a lot of choices, intentionally made or otherwise, that take away from the horror aspect of Dead by Daylight. Many of them could stand to be altered or removed entirely, but they're also a big part of the core gameplay experience at this point. Builds are a fun way to add a little bit of diversity on a game-to-game basis, even if it's somewhat shallow. Killer mechanics have created a resource management role that has to balance careful sacrifices and optimal pressure to gain the upper hand. The game would never have been alive 8 years without having such a sustainable gameplay loop. But that doesn't mean the horror aspect can't be improved, even if marginally. Lights Out mode was an okay example of this. It made things scarier and more interesting, although it wasn't able to hang. I have some minor suggestions I think could stand to improve both the lower skill and playtime horror aspect of the game and the higher level gameplay as well, although I'll be honest, the higher impact changes could probably do more damage than good to the competitive side of things. Suggestion 1 is to improve generators. This is the suggestion I think would play best overall for everyone. Make it an actually involved process in the first place that requires your attention. My first thought would be maybe a randomized manual that players have to look through to fix the generator, similar to Keep Talking and Nobody Explodes in some ways. This also allows players a new avenue of skill expression in terms of problem solving, being able to figure out the manual quickly. It makes for an interesting ability to carry through knowledge to other generators, meaning the game naturally speeds up over time as players memorize the manual. This would require a massive rework of gen perks, which is not happening, but a man can dream. Suggestion 2, a bit more drastic this time. This is one that might not go as great, honestly. It kind of would damage looping, but that's okay. We're in my fantasy realm right now. A bit more drastic. Make the survivors first person, but give them a free look button. This change does play quite well with the generator change if you were to do them in concert, because in a first person view, a generator pop-up doesn't become this incumbent thing that covers your screen. You just look at the generator or you look away from the generator. It definitely could ruin chases a bit, I think, but I think it would still be interesting even if as like a one-off game mode. But again, probably not happening because generators. Suggestion 3 is the most drastic I have. It's to rework the terror radius. This would fundamentally alter the game, and I think it probably wouldn't play well with the community, to be perfectly honest, but I think it would be interesting if the builds and the lulls in the music were semi-random, kind of like in a real horror movie. So instead of it just being when the music builds, you know something's going to happen, it is something going to happen. It gives you a little bit of that paranoia and tension. And if you've ever watched like a good horror movie where sometimes the music will build to nothing, that still leaves behind that feeling of something's going to happen. I'm scared, like there's something going on here. And I think that's something that Dead by Daylight is really, really missing and could really use. And also, you know, it helps to curb a little bit of the survivors having perma information and just knowing everything and being fucking omnipotent. Swifts still completely ruined all of these changes, but you know, that's the competitive side of the game. That's separate. Let's pull back to the script here before I ramble on for another 15 minutes. Without implementation, I have no idea how these changes would feel. They could be good or they could be the worst thing to ever touch gaming, but at the very least, something I do know now and something I hope I've conveyed to you is why Dead by Daylight isn't scary. It's a mixture of constant immersion breaking, a completely ass-backwards power dynamic, and way too much information on the survivor side. Alright, so the video is basically over. This is going to be the more laid-back section. I might not edit out the breaths or anything, or sort of keep it short and sweet. I'm just going to talk. So I haven't played Dead by Daylight in a while, if you couldn't tell. I used to really love the game, but after going through all of the bullshit metas and then every map was just actively hostile to my main, Billy, I just couldn't play anymore, you know? It just felt bad. I think it was the map that the alien guy was released with, the alien robot. He shoots the weird camera shit. I played him, but that map just made me realize, man, they're not going to bring it back around. And, you know, then they did the Billy rework. I came back for a bit, but it just didn't hold my attention. I do still definitely have a love for the game deep down. You know, there's nothing that's like it, honestly. Like, just having that horror aesthetic combined with everything else there, it's very interesting. And, you know, there's nothing that scratches the itch quite the same way as a good curve, except a Demo Night TF2. If you're a Billy main like me and you're stuck in Dead by Daylight still, go play TF2. It's like crack compared to fucking Billy. Honestly, it's so much better. I'll always look on to Dead by Daylight and be a little sad that the game has never quite managed to be its best self, you know, and that's how it is sometimes, but man, I don't know. You know, at the very least, I think I've made peace with the state of the game now. Believe it or not, the first draft of this script was basically just me shitting on behavior. You probably believe it because that middle section where I got a little heated. Know that that's just a character. I definitely have a lot of love for behavior and what they've done with the game. They don't deserve hate or harassment. You know, I really appreciate everything they did, and they tried their best, and they've fixed their mistakes time and time again. They've done their best to walk things back. But I'm very happy that I ditched that script and took a more interesting angle of actual horror and fear. I read this really interesting paper on fear and immersion. The fear one, or the immersion one, is the one you saw about spatial presence in part of the video. It's great. If you have time, read it. Like, it's really great. Like, just looking into horror and fear more and more, really, really interesting, because you start looking into so many different things and it gives you so many different angles. And I didn't want to swamp the video down with too much information. And honestly, I didn't read like that much. I read like a few things, but it was still like a grand amount of information, and it was very, very beautiful. It was genuinely amazing. One thing I definitely didn't expect was to be opening up like a 40-ton can of worms. Like, I knew it was going to be a complex topic because horror's obviously going to be a more complex topic, but I did not expect it to be that big. Other than that, I think I finally just made peace with Dead by Daylight being it. And I think other than that, I don't know. Oh, you should check out some more stuff from my channel. On the left, you'll see my video on monetization. Despite its flaws, I think you should probably watch it if you haven't. It's a good video. I think it deserves probably more than the views it has now, but, you know, that's up to you guys to decide, not me. I think it's good. I understand that it could have been a lot better. I could have done more research. I could have put more time into it, but, you know, I wanted to rush something out after my first video, try and hold some of that lightning in the bottle. Didn't work great, but that's okay. You know, we live and we learn. On the right is going to be my latest upload, which at the time of posting obviously won't be anything, but that gives you another reason to subscribe and stay tuned. I would appreciate it. Oh, yeah, and thanks for watching, by the way. I really do appreciate it.